Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a Ukraine War news update, the second part thereof for the 27th of August 2025. It's a busy day I'm having today with regard to news. There's an awful lot going on in terms of what's going on in the White House, what's going on with regard to Greenland and Denmark, and the calling of the US ambassador to explain the goings-on in Greenland to try and foment opposition to Denmark. We're going to touch on that, but I suggest you just go and watch my breaking news update earlier. It's all happening. Just goodness me, crazy times that we live in. And of course, all the stuff to do with the US backsliding into autocracy. Now, we're going to start with the security guarantees and peace negotiations. Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor, said Zelensky made it clear last week in Washington he is ready to sit down at the negotiating table with Putin in the coming days. Now it's Moscow's turn. If the Russian president is really serious about putting an end to the bloodshed, he will accept this offer. If Russia does not take such a step, the pressure will have to be increased. The EU is preparing new sanctions. So we know we've got a 19th sanctions package that's going to be applied to the Russian shadow fleet. We know that the EU has said really the rest of the sanctions, the EU doesn't have much more that they can do in terms of Russian sanctions. The rest is up to the US. But the EU seems to be standing behind Zelensky and saying, look, it's not Zelensky that's not wanting to sit down and have a meeting. It's Putin. The question is, do the Americans understand that? Or does Trump understand that? And will he hold Putin to account for any meeting that doesn't take place? Quote, I'm not aware of any concessions of the Russian Federation for a peaceful settlement, says Zelensky. I do not consider promises not to occupy further as concessions. Now, I don't know whether Trump will ever hear about this or indeed Zelensky, but this is a direct refutation of what J.D. Vance said in interview to Kristen Welker of NBC, where J.D. Vance said, and in fact, Trump has also said this, but using different examples, but they've both said that Russia has made concessions. Russia's deciding not to attack, not to take control of the entirety of Ukraine, as if that's an actual concession. Like I've said to you before, I could promise anything that's physically impossible, or that's, practically impossible. I'm going to concede I'm not going to run to London tomorrow in 2 hours. Well, no. Well, that's not a concession. Like, you were never going to be able to do that anyway. That's ridiculous. So these concessions, supposed concessions that Russia have made are not concessions. And then Zelensky calls out both Vance and Trump by saying, I'm not aware of any concessions the Russian Federation have made for a peaceful settlement, and I don't consider promises not to occupy Ukraine further as concessions. So that's good. Now, in terms of security guarantees, the Financial Times reports that the West is planning a 3-layer defense system for post-war Ukraine with NATO forces. About 10 countries are prepared to send troops to Ukrainian territory after the war ends, with Britain and Britain has proposed deploying Typhoon fighter jets in western Ukraine. All sorts of different things still going on. And there is a lot of confusion because the number of troops has gone down quite a lot since the Coalition of the Willing was first proposed. And now it seems like Britain and France are going to be the major contributors to troops. But then Britain's saying, well, actually, they're not going to be front line. And France is, we're going to protect over here and protect that. And there's really a lot of confusion as to who's providing what troops and what the remit for those troops is going to be. And that's still an issue. And the UK is still saying, look, we'll provide troops, but the US has to provide a backstop. Then luckily, Trump did agree that the US was going to be providing a backup to the security guarantees, but we don't quite know exactly what that entails. Now, Western capitals have drafted this security plan for Ukraine that will begin with a demilitarized zone, so this 3-layer idea, a demilitarized zone patrolled by neutral peacekeepers acceptable to both Kiev and Moscow. The idea that actually Russia will have a say in these security guarantees, I find this incredible. Behind it, Ukrainian forces armed and trained by NATO would hold a fortified border. A European-led deterrence force backed by US support would provide a third line of defense deeper inside Ukraine. So that's interesting. So the Coalition of the Willing look to be right at the back, with the Ukrainians in the middle, and in the first line, some kind of force agreed upon by Ukraine and Moscow. The proposal is part of ongoing efforts to secure Ukraine while avoiding direct NATO-Russia confrontation. Interesting. Now, Ukraine should receive security guarantees, quote, that come very close to what NATO membership means as part of any future peace deal, says Germany's foreign minister. Quote, we cannot demand that Ukraine seriously consider territorial concessions if it does not receive at least real security guarantees from as many states as possible so that at least the rest will be safe, Johann Werdfuhl said. He also emphasized the importance of expanding the circle of guarantor nations beyond Europe, particularly noting the need for US participation in any security framework. Canadians have offered their troops. Australians, I think, have as well. So that's really important. But, you know, if it's going to look something like Article 5 for NATO, it does that three-layered option give, you know, what is needed. Now, Andrei Yermak, the Ukrainian President's Office chappie, has Zelensky's chief of staff has confirmed the Financial Times reporting that said that each country in the coalition would contribute differently, and in the end, the picture will be a mix of military, political, and economic support. Senior US officials have told European counterparts that Washington is prepared to contribute strategic enablers, including intelligence, surveillance, command and control, and air defense assets. So, you know, the US is going to be a part of that. And, you know, you do have unlikely sources of support for the coalition of the willing. So the Green Liberal Party of Switzerland, and its youth wing are demanding that the country join the international coalition of the willing and send peacekeepers to the border regions of Ukraine. So who knew? So that's all going on. Lots of conversation concerning what that looks like. Now, I'm going to go into the geopolitical discussion at large now. I'm going to start with something that's been developing over the last 24 hours. So a large-scale search is underway in the Norwegian Sea after reports that a Russian submarine may have threatened the American aircraft carrier USS Gerald R. Ford. Norwegian, British and American P-8 Poseidon aircraft have been conducting surveillance missions, according to Dagbladet. Norwegian armed forces confirm that monitoring by Russian forces is routine when NATO aircraft carrier groups operate in the region. Lieutenant Colonel Brynjar Ståhl emphasised that both aircraft, surface vessels and submarines are regularly used for surveillance. This story is a mix of reporting from the UK tabloid The Sun, Norwegian newspapers such as Fremover. The Sun is known for sensationalist stance, so some details may be exaggerated, but the surveillance missions were carried out because the USS Gerald R. Ford carrier group was operating near Lofoten, the Lofoten Islands off Norway, and Russian forces were reportedly monitoring its movements. Till more information is concerned, all details should be taken with a grain of salt. But actually, there is supposedly a hunt for submarines. So this Russian submarine, and there is a lot of serious reporting on this. Large-scale search is underway in Norway for a Russian submarine that is believed to have threatened the US aircraft carrier in the Norwegian Sea. So, yeah, watch this space. Now, the reason I start with this, and it fits snugly between security guarantees. So you've got the situation where the US is integral in security guarantees, and the Europeans are hoping that US is going to be on Europe's side. And then you have Trump all over the shop with regard to Ukraine at the moment, just all over the shop. His cabinet, likewise all over the shop, more really pro-Russian than pro-Ukrainian. And all these influence operations from Russia, and then you've got the US at the moment stripping out the CIA, the departments that are looking at foreign interference in elections, etc., etc., etc. It's, you know, there are some moments of, yeah, that's good from Trump and the American administration. You're like, yeah, we can get behind that. That's the right thing to say. But then, and considering we went from the Alaska summit, which was a disaster, an unmitigated disaster, to the summit with the European leaders in the White House, I don't know if you could call it summit meeting, and Zelensky, and everyone's like, yeah, that's brilliant. The Americans seem to be back on track. And then they all leave, and then Trump just goes to his default position of being anti-Ukraine and pro-Russia. And so we just have this constant flip-flopping. It's so bloody frustrating because the US needs to be consistent, and they're just not. Now, why I'm placing this here is because, and I've said this before, sometimes the Russians do things that are stupid. And whether this is anything out of the ordinary, as you know, this is probably stuff that often takes place, right? But if the US is, if the Russians are doing something to to pee off the Americans, then that gives the Americans permission to side with Ukraine and be more unified with Europe. And so, the Russians are always playing this delicate game of trying to prod and probe, but also not annoy, I imagine, the Americans too much. Now, that wouldn't have been the case 20 years ago. They'd annoy the Americans as much as they like. Thank you very much. This is the Cold War type thing, or 30 years ago, whatever. But nowadays, the US appears to be somewhat compromised. And so the Russians are playing this game of like, how much can we manipulate the US so we don't want to annoy them that much? So when there are these opportunities where the Americans can get annoyed with the Russians, this is actually good news for Ukraine and for Europe, because it pushes the US back towards their initial starting point. Now, we still have, unfortunately, interviews like this with Steve Witkoff, the envoy to Russia. This is Brett Baer on Fox News, and Brett Baer is one of the very few Fox News people that asks decent questions and doesn't just softball every interview. And here he is asking Steve Witkoff a good question.
Who's more responsible for keeping this war going, Russia or Ukraine?
So what you want to do is ask questions that are pretty obvious, right? They're leading questions. Who's prolonging this war more, Russia or Ukraine? And the answer should be, well, obviously Russia are complete bastards or whatever. But what you want to do is get these officials to actually say these things explicitly. But the problem is, like, they don't say these things explicitly, and they waffle on and do not answer the question. And then the interviewer, even Brett Baer here, just carries on with the interview. Always just do the Mehdi Hassan thing, which is, I'm not going to let this go. You're going to answer this question. Answer this question. Which side is prolonging this war, Russia or Ukraine?
This is a different situation here. We've got these are two tough sides here. And you heard the president say that
not answering the question.
He's disappointed in Russia in some respects, and he's also disappointed in the Ukrainians.
Oh, both sides of them, right.
But I would point this out to you. No one has done more, and I'm talking about in the last 8 months.
No one's asked you to sit there and tell us how freaking wonderful Donald Trump is. No one asked you that. He said, who is prolonging the war more, Russia or Ukraine? Oh, both sides. Isn't Donald Trump amazing?
Then this president, in narrowing the issues between these two countries and bringing the sides close to a deal. The Russians have put a peace proposal on the table. It involves Donetsk. It may not be something that the Ukrainians can take, but no one's ever made that kind of progress here, and it's because of his force of personality and his motivation to end the conflict, end the death, that we're at this place where we think the end is in sight.
Who's more?
It cuts off there, and I haven't seen the original, so I don't know, but I assume Brett Baer doesn't say, sorry, with all due respect, you did not answer my question one iota. Who is more responsible for prolonging this war, Russia or Ukraine? And please answer my question directly and do not divert. And don't use this as an excuse to tell me how freaking wonderful Donald Trump is. So this both sidesism is on show, and unfortunately this was what Donald Trump said at a cabinet meeting.
If I can save that by doing sanctions or by just being me, or by using a very strong tariff system that's very costly to Russia or Ukraine or whoever we have,
The idea that we'll do it to Russia or Ukraine or because Russia are bad, but so are Ukraine. And, war crimes happening, but with Ukraine as well. We can't be leaving it hanging here that Russia is in any way bad. And then he has just come out and said, do I have it anywhere else? Yes, this is it. So I'll bring this back to here. This is where it should go. So this is Trump talking about
I have to also see, because
the both sidesism.
Not everybody, Zelensky is not exactly innocent either, okay? It takes.
Can you please justify or explain what you're saying here?
Now, I have to also see, because not everybody, Zelensky is not exactly innocent either, okay? It takes two people to tango, and I say it all the time. You got to get them together. I get along with Zelensky now, but we have a much different relationship because.
Ha ha ha, they're laughing about. Well, we get together now. We get on well now. What? Because then when you didn't get on well together, it was because he didn't want you to lie about. He didn't want you to spread disinformation about Ukraine, and he called you out on it, and that's why you didn't like him. But now he knows not to call you out when you lie. Now we get on well. Ha 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 ha. Say all his sycophants sitting around the dictator's round table there, all long table.
Because now we're not paying any money to Ukraine. You know, stop that. We're paying money to ourselves. What's happening is NATO is buying all of the equipment and paying in full. But now,
so it takes two to tangle, and how wonderful it is that we can sell a help to Ukraine. We're not interested in helping Ukraine. I don't really care for Ukraine. It takes two to tango. They're equally as bad as the Russians. Blah 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 blah. But it's all right if we sell the stuff to NATO. That's fine. As Joe Walsh, a former Republican, says, he's such an effing traitor to the free world. Okay, so talking about sanctions to both sides, or maybe lifting sanctions to, I don't know, Russia. Oh, what do we hear? The US approves some diamond import transactions in Russia license. So now we're seeing that Trump already is taking off Russian sanctions to serve his Kremlin master. That's what Jay in Kyiv is saying. What else? While Putin continues to bombard Ukrainian cities with missiles, Exxon held secret talks with Rosneft about going back to Russia, says William Browder. And I've reported on that a number of times, but just to remind you that there is this kind of still operating in the background of all these conversations and discussions and peace negotiations is the idea that the US really wants to see this all as an excuse to make lots of money out of or with Russia. They don't care about the morality. When I say the US, I mean the Trump administration, and that Trump doesn't really have a natural affinity to Ukraine, to Zelensky, to countries that want sovereignty, because he just wants to be a dictator himself. I've done enough videos on that recently to give you a sense of that. Here is Trump again in a cabinet meeting.
you never know. It's war.
Can you stop the family?
With war, you never know, right? War's very tricky, very horrible. But with war, you never know. Things change. People go into war, think they're going to win the war, and then they get their asses kicked. And they lose their country, and they lose millions of lives. Nobody goes into a war thinking they're going to lose. They go in. I'm sure that Ukraine thought they were going to win. It's going to be, we're going to win. You're going to beat somebody that's 15 times your size. Biden shouldn't have let that happen.
So I can't tell you how fecking disgusting this is, right? And like, again, yeah, oh, he's ranting, blah, blah, blah. But like, we keep thinking, oh, is Trump going to say the right thing, do the right thing? But Trump's core belief is so corrupted. This is so morally bankrupt that I just want to punch him in the face. Like, he's saying that, oh, they thought they were going to win. No, they didn't. Like, they had people in their homes making Molotov cocktails to throw at Russian troops. That's not expecting to win. That's desperation, because you're hanging on by fingernails to democracy to protect your own family and friends and livelihood, with the probability that you're going to either die or not prevail. You're being told by everyone that you're going to lose within 3 days. That's not what Ukraine did. The Ukrainians didn't start putting up a fight because they thought, even though they're 15 times smaller than Russia, that they were going to win. Now, they got their tails up when things looked better for the Ukrainians, when the Russians, because they hadn't planned for a war, weren't expecting a war, and a war happened, and it was all a disaster to begin with. Then the Ukrainians thought, brilliant, let's do it. But then the rest of the world didn't quite help out quick enough, and Russia were able to sort of get to their feet, and it's been this long protracted situation ever since. But as Republican Representative Don Bacon from Nebraska says, it's so insulting. Russia invaded Ukraine and almost took their capital. It was Russia who was overconfident and got their asses kicked.
Biden shouldn't have, I mean, the man was grossly incompetent. He should have never been there. That would have never happened. But you don't go into a war that's 15 times your size.
What do you mean? Like, all the countries that were invaded and taken over by Nazi Germany didn't sit there and go, let's not go to war because we're going to get beaten. They put up a fight and eventually they get beaten. But do you know what? We don't just, like some countries maybe were like, okay, let's just, well, come on in. You know, when they're attacked, yeah, okay, just give up straight away. But what Trump is advocating is essentially that all countries should give up, all sports teams should give up playing if the team is bigger and better than you. Just give up. Don't expect to win if you're the underdog. Just give up. It was disgusting that Biden supported the underdog here. This war never would have happened because, of course, it wouldn't have been a war because Russia would have walked in and taken the entirety of the country without resistance. And that's what Trump wants. That's what Trump wanted, and that's what he still wants to have happened. Trump is a moral monster. And of course, all these videos I've done on him moving towards, at great speed, towards dictatorship. It's worth reminding ourselves that, what do we see on his lock screen of his phone? His iPhone lock screen is a big old picture of himself, the same picture that's just been unfurled over the Department of Labour. That's his lock screen. That's how narcissistic this man is. Right. We're only going to do a little bit more of the US here before we get onto other things concerning Ukraine and whatnot. But I just want to give you a heads up because this kind of dictatorship thing is really worrying. But we've also heard, so a couple of times in the last few days, he said, some Americans, some people think I should be dictator, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, he's priming the electorate. He's normalizing the idea of the US becoming dictatorship. He said previously, we're thinking about sending American citizens, these criminals that hit people, blah, 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 these ne'er-do-wells. We're going to send them to a foreign gulag, Bukele's El Salvadorian gulag. Okay, it's the idea that it's not just going to be illegal immigrants. You're going to be sending Americans there. Okay, and then where are we going to see this jump from American citizens who hit grannies over the head with a baseball bat to political opposition? Start sending them to gulags, start really looking like a dictatorship. Well, here's your priming. So this is Stephen Miller, one of the most disgusting human beings on earth. He is a person that's running the White House. He is your policy man in the White House. He is your Grimer Wormtongue whispering to Trump's King Theoden.
Democrat Party does not fight for, care about, or represent American citizens. It is an entity devoted exclusively to the defense of hardened criminals, gangbangers, and illegal alien killers and terrorists. The Democrat Party is not a political party. It is a domestic extremist organization.
Okay, so the Democrat Party is not a political party. It's a domestic extremist organization. So he's now called out the opposition party in the United States of America as being criminal terrorists. And he goes on and shouts about that, and it's just a sickening tirade. And he ends up like this.
Scrubbing away all the graffiti, the trash, the homeless encampments, the druggies. Instead of cleaning up the city, instead of thanking him for that, they're saying, President Trump, how dare you save our lives? How dare you save our children? How dare you save our city? The Democrat Party, Sean, that exists today, it disgusts me. I do not recognize that party, Sean.
It disgusts me. I do not recognize them. It's a domestic extremist organization. And then you see this from Trump. George Soros and his wonderful radical left son should be charged with RICO because of their support of violent protests and much more. All throughout the United States of America, we're not going to allow these lunatics to rip apart America anymore, never giving it so much as a chance to breathe and be free. Soros and his group of psychopaths have caused great damage to our country. That includes his crazy West Coast friends. Be careful. We're watching you. Thank you for your attention to this matter. So now what you're seeing is the threat to arrest on RICO charges the people who fund the opposition movements and parties. So you're saying, right, the opposition party, these are extremist terrorists, and people like George Soros need to watch themselves because we're going to arrest them on RICO charges. And you're expecting these guys to stand up to the dictatorial machinations of the Russian Federation? They want to copy that. Now, I'm going to go back to the former Republican Joe Walsh here that now says it like it is. And if you take nothing else from this video, it's what he says.
And I know fascism is a heavy term.
Sure it is.
But I'll say it. We have a fascist in the White House. He's suppressing his opposition. He's persecuting his political opponents. He's
John Bolton persecuting his political opponents.
Glorifying and using the military. He's dominating the private economy. He's suppressing our individual liberties. And Ali, look, like all great dictators, he came to power preaching about a nation in decline. Who's to blame for that nation in decline? Brown and black people and Muslims. So look what he's doing, Ali. He's disappearing brown and black people off of our streets. He's denying student visas to Muslim students who want to come here. It's all happening now, and we need to face that. And I know
it's happening now. Now, John Bolton, let's go back to John Bolton, bring this back to Ukraine. So John Bolton had just had his house raided, and he issued a defiant statement after Trump's FBI raided his house. He will not be intimidated into silence, says this source. We don't agree with Bolton often, but this is what courage in the face of rising authoritarianism looks like. Now, John Bolton then says, Donald Trump's Ukraine policy today is no more coherent than it was last Friday when his administration executed search warrants against my home and office. Collapsing in confusion and haste, Trump's negotiations may be their last throes, along with his Nobel Peace Prize campaign. Bolton there is saying what I've been saying for some time now, that Trump's approach to Ukraine is lacking any coherence, and that's because he doesn't have the requisite knowledge. He goes to other countries, he gets some clarity, he speaks to other people, or he gets those countries to come to the White House, but then when he's away from those people, he's surrounded by the Heritage Foundation and they poison his mind, whether it be Stephen Miller or JD Vance or whatever. The Heritage Foundation cronies poison his mind with pro-Russian, anti-Ukrainian rhetoric, and he goes to this default position of at best both sizism, at worst fawning over photographs of Putin, right? And it's just not coherent, because when he's with these European leaders, he's like, yeah, let's be strong, let's do this, let's phone up Putin, and then when he's away from them, it just goes completely the other way. And yet, what we are seeing is that actually, without wanting to be too partisan here, the Democrats are standing up for Ukraine, at least rhetorically. Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, the billionaire governor of Illinois, who has said, no, we don't want Trump coming to Chicago and bringing the National Guard there and cleaning our streets up, blah, blah, blah. No, thank you very much. And he says Illinois stands with Ukraine today and always. Slava Ukraini. That's what I like to see. And then, someone saying, I wonder why. Well, yeah, the seeds of the Pritzker family's fortune were planted in 1930s after Abraham Nicholas Pritzker, Ukrainian Jewish immigrant to Chicago, partnered with his brother. Okay, fair enough. He's saying the right things. And then actually, it's not just the Democrats, though. We get those old school Republicans, and I now put Mike Pence into more of an old school Republican context. Putin understands only force. Diplomacy alone is not enough. Former US Vice President Mike Pence has called for new sanctions against Russia. Congress could corner Putin by immediately passing additional sanctions against Russia and putting them on President's desk while negotiations continue. Having sanctions ready to sign would strengthen Trump's position at the negotiating table. It would send a clear signal to Putin. If he drags, cheats, or backs down, the Russian economy will pay a catastrophic price. And yet we hear that actually some sanctions are possibly being lightened, being lifted or made somewhat easier for the Russians. Trump is firing competent people in the national security apparatus. So we heard that the director of intelligence was fired. We're hearing that the CIA is going to be cut by 50%, that 37 different Russian analysts have had their security clearances taken away. And now the NSA's acting directors tried to save top scientists from Purge here in artificial intelligence. So you're starting to see these purges take place in really key areas. all the while, Trump is being expansionist and imperialistic when it comes to, well, we have seen it with Canada. He's backed down a little bit because Mark Carney was pretty strong and the Canadians in general just completely repudiated the US's advances there. But they have been working on Greenland. And as I reported in my breaking news update just now, there, 3 Americans associated with close links to Donald Trump have been infiltrating Greenland in support of his goal of annexing the autonomous island. It's said to be part of a 3-part strategy involving pressure, charm, and infiltration. They did the pressure with the rhetoric and the charm offensive with Donald Trump Jr. and JD Vance going to Greenland, and now they've got infiltration. They want Greenland. Now this has resulted because these have been people going around Greenland trying to work out who can be used to divide and conquer, find recruits for an annexationist movement, identifying supporters and opponents of Trump's plan to take over Greenland and seeking to magnify Greenlandic grievances with Denmark. So Denmark has now called the US ambassador to explain why there's been infiltration operations taking place within Greenland. It's absolutely shocking that we would be here in 2025 with the US, with NATO allies, trying to do infiltration operations into a NATO allied territory. It's absolutely shocking, but that's where we are with Donald Trump. Trump has reportedly, then on the flip side here, and this was a moment of clarity when he's with European leaders. So this happened as a result of European leaders. European leaders were with Trump in the White House, and they said, it would be much more beneficial if Ukraine can join the EU, then we can work together to help Ukraine. You guys don't have to worry so much about it. It'd be part of the EU, and this is a European problem, as you are suggesting, and the European solution is Ukraine in the EU. Trump goes, okay, well, go for it. Like, why hasn't that happened? And then the European leaders go, well, because Viktor Orban is a single leader that has put a stop to the Ukraine's accession to the EU. So then there was an angry response from Trump to Orban. So Orban was then hassled by Trump for vetoing this accession. Trump has reportedly convinced Viktor Orban to lift his veto on Ukraine's EU membership, despite Orban still opposing Kiev's accession, according to Politico. So it could be that he is going to kowtow. Viktor Orban's going to kowtow to Donald Trump's demands there, and as long as Donald Trump's demands can maintain over time, because now without the European leaders being in the White House to convince him of that, you can imagine that Donald Trump might go back on his word and back on his demands there. Now, France has said that Russia's pressuring Germany's Nord Stream investigation. A French UN delegate said that by making the council meet many times, the Russian Federation is putting pressure on Germany's investigation, which is unacceptable. We've seen that there's been this arrest in Italy for the German investigation of a Ukrainian who's thought to be at least partly responsible for the explosions. Then we hear of issues between Russia and Azerbaijan still maintaining. No wonder the rift between Russia and Azerbaijan isn't healing, and this is horrific here. So Agentstvo Projekt, who, a media outlet, has found out that Russian security forces cut off the genitals of Azeris, Azerbaijanis. These are the diaspora people that were arrested in Yekaterinburg at the end of June. Their genitals have been cut off. The Ziadin and Gusein Safarov, are they brothers? They both died after being detained in Yekaterinburg at the end of June. Russia always finds a way to be more depraved. So that is going to be fueling the Azerbaijani disdain for Russia at the moment. It's worth noting that Russia has also signed a decree to withdraw from the European Convention for the Prevention of Torture, ending its commitment to the Treaty Against Torture and Inhuman Treatment it joined as a Council of Europe member. How surprising. On the other hand, the UK and Armenia have agreed to upgrade their relations to the level of a strategic partnership. Another stab at the Kremlin's back, and yet another failure for the great geostrategist, says next to here. Russian propagandists are already in hysteria over the fact that a former ally, Armenia, has shifted toward the main enemy, the Anglo-Saxons. So the British have already started off this £50 million military strategic partnership between Armenia and the UK, and now that's going to be taken further, which is good news there. many allied nations, as in European nations, Americans, are going to be fighting over bringing Azerbaijan and Armenia much towards a Western sphere of influence, and actually away from China as well, if at all possible. Now, the Hungarian Foreign Minister, Peter Szijjártó, once again has threatened Ukraine with a possible cut-off of electricity supplies, because although oil goes from Russia to Slovakia and Hungary through the Druzhba pipeline, actually Ukraine receives energy from Hungary to add to its grid that is often under an awful lot of pressure from Russian bombardment. Now, the Hungarians have threatened to cut off electricity supplies to Ukraine, citing recent Ukrainian strikes on the Druzhba pipeline. He claimed Hungary provides 30 to 40% of Ukraine's electricity imports and warned Budapest could create difficulties if Kyiv continues. Then JD Vance was being caught trying to incite regime change in Ukraine and allied nation to the west. So I've already reported on this, but this is coming from the Guardian article where Zaluzhny was approached by Vance and his peeps here. So just to remind you, just because I think it's worth reminding ourselves of everything that's been going on, we kind of forget within 24 hours much of what we learn, because it's so much is happening. But when you look at Greenland and then you see what's going on with Zelensky in the UK as the ambassador to the UK, so many people know that Zelensky has political intentions for Ukraine. I don't think Zelensky would probably run again after the war, because he should probably quit and take the plaudits as being the wartime leader that was as popular and successful as he was at his height, and let someone like Zelensky just take the reins. But the Americans were wanting Zelensky to take over earlier because they didn't like Zelensky post February 2025 meeting in the White House. So Valery Zelensky, the current Ukrainian ambassador to the UK and former commander-in-chief of the armed forces, was approached by JD Vance's team, who was looking for a replacement to Zelensky 3 days after Zelensky's visit to which JD had argued with Zelensky. JD Vance and his team had started to try to arrange a regime change within Ukraine. Under international law, states are not supposed to interfere in the internal affairs of other sovereign countries, which is part of the UN Charter, Article 2.4, and trying to organise regime changes even in hostile nations is extremely frowned upon and in most cases illegal, never mind allied states. Thankfully, although Zelensky and Zelensky have had disagreements in the past, Zelensky has remained extremely loyal to Zelensky, his roles and his country. Zelensky had reportedly refused to speak with JD Vance and instead went to Heathrow Airport to meet Zelensky with Keir Starmer, got a photo taken with Zelensky shaking hands with, and posted it to his social media. After everything else that has happened, it doesn't surprise me one bit the American government is trying to interfere with Ukrainian democracy and incite regime change, just like Putin does, says Bricktop NATO here. Now, this is really important. Zelensky's refusal to surrender, Zelensky's refusal to surrender has Trump allocating the Vance team to pull all the levers to rip apart the Ukrainian government. Sorry, actually, that was Zelensky's refusal to surrender. Then leads JD Trump to going to Zelensky, and this is the quote from the original Guardian article. US Vice President has been instrumental in provoking the confrontation between Trump and Zelensky in an Oval Office. From his perch on an adjacent sofa, now Vance and the others in Trump's orbit are apparently sounding out potential alternatives to the troublesome Zelensky. Vance's team, quote, tried various diplomatic and other channels to go through to Zelensky, said one of 3 sources with knowledge of the efforts, but he refused to take the call. So, Greenland, Ukraine. The US is getting involved. French President Emmanuel Macron has invited German Chancellor Friedrich Merz to his summer residence, Fort de Brégançon, sorry, there's a cedilla there, to discuss key diplomatic issues, including security guarantees for Ukraine as part of the potential peace deal with Russia. Now, hopefully, we're going to see France and Germany get closer and closer. There are issues between France and Italy at the moment due to the Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini in Italy. But Germany and France do need to get closer together. They are the heart of a united Europe. Commander-in-Chief Zelensky has met with the UK Defence Chief Admiral Sir Tony Radakin. So Tony Radakin has been a stalwart component, really, of the UK support for Ukraine. Where American military personnel have not been allowed to go into Ukraine, such as General Cavoli, the NATO chief, when he was in charge. Like, the British don't have that rule. So we were able to send Radikin into Kiev to meet with the people, and the British have been very much at the heart of coordinating support for Ukraine. They really have. I think after this war is over, the British will probably come out looking pretty good in terms of there'll be an awful lot we understand that the Brits were doing that has not been publicly announced or announceable. So I know, for example, that our special forces are very important in what they're doing in Ukraine and have been since before the war. So before the 2022 iteration of the war started, you know, our special forces and other countries have been playing an integral part and have continued to do so. The British apparently, and this is like, I was hearing this in Ukraine when I was out in Ukraine from certain people, the British are doing way more than people know. They, like, an absolute bunch of stuff is being done by the Brits. And so it's no surprise here that Sir Tony Radican is receiving the Cross of Merit for his role in arming Ukraine ahead of the full-scale invasion. And it highlights that strong relationship between them. Now, Sir Tony Radican, he's from the Royal Navy. He's in charge of our armed forces. And he's going to be replaced by as the UK Defence Chief by an RAF guy, Sir Richard Knighton. So that might bring a different set of skills, and it might bring the RAF really into, especially if there's going to be a no-fly zone and whatnot, the RAF are going to play an integral role there. So anyway, I think that's quite reflective of, emblematic of a relationship between the two countries there. Now we're going to move to China. Genocidal Russian Duma members have arrived in China as Putin is begging supposedly for air defenses and cash. That's how Jay and Kiev interprets it. But every time you see Russians go to Pyongyang in North Korea, or to Iran, or to China, you know they are going cap in hand to get as much money and as much equipment as they possibly can. And it also is reflective, I think, of them being in a spot of bother. But actually, some people, and many have said this, I know Michael Vucha on my channel has said often that, you know, watch out, you've got the fifth plenum or whatever, you got the political meetings due to take place in China, and Xi Jinping might not be in a very comfortable position, actually, even though he's made himself dictator for life type thing. There is a chance that Xi Jinping might be ousted. So isn't it interesting that we're hearing today Xi Jinping is conducting the largest purge of China's military leadership since Mao Zedong? Wow. And I think that could be preemptive. So the idea that Xi Jinping was actually in a very weak position, I wonder if that's still the case. So since the beginning of his third term in 2023, Xi Jinping has initiated massive personnel reshuffles in the People's Liberation Army. Almost 18% of the officers he appointed have disappeared from the public eye, come under investigation, or been arrested. The latest figure to be involved in this purge is General He Weidong, the second highest ranking officer, who has been removed from power. He is considered a close ally of Xi and was responsible for planning military operations for the potential invasion of Taiwan. As a result of the reshuffles, 14 generals have left the Central Military Commission, setting a record since the time of Mao. Analysts have warned that such purges could affect the army's readiness, especially in the context of potential conflict with Taiwan. This is all going to be a game of power, a game of chess domestically. Russia and China, though, are increasingly in charge of the entire American political apparatus, says Yankov. What's he referring to? Well, in the context of China and domestic issues, we're also learning through a New York Times article that an investigation by them has found that the Chinese consulate in Manhattan, so New York, has worked to sink political candidates who challenge Xi Jinping, support Taiwan, and support Hong Kong. So they've actually been involved in getting rid of people domestically in American politics who don't fit into their agenda. AI's Audrey Wong quoted on Beijing's attempt to stifle dissent among the Chinese diaspora. This meddling may seem modest, involving politicians who are unlikely to affect international policy, but China is determined to quash dissent in its diaspora before it spreads back home, said Audrey Wong, a fellow of the American Enterprise Institute who studies Chinese influence. Beijing is also making a longer bet, she said. You never know which politician might eventually run for Congress at the national level or become a presidential candidate. China's influence machine is one of the world's most expansive expansive and effective over decades. It's harassed exiles in France, bribed academics in Britain, and targeted politicians in Canada. So there are loads of red flags flying there, and that is definitely a worry. Now, we're going to go back. Well, we're going to stay on China, but we're going to go back to the cabinet meeting although this isn't actually to do with the cabinet meeting, it's just the announcement that was made here. So you had in May, Secretary Rubio said they were aggressively removing visas of Chinese students. So the US was going hard on China. They were going to kick Chinese students out of American universities, blah, blah, blah. And then like 2 days ago, the Americans announced that Trump announced that they're going to allow 600,000 Chinese students to study in the UK. What the freaking hell happened there? In fact, Fox News was it Laura Ingraham that was questioning, was it Howard Lutnick? And she was like, she was like, I don't understand this. This is insane. And she actually didn't just ask a question and then went on to the next thing. She's like, no, like none of this makes sense. And she's right. Yesterday, you said you wanted to allow 600,000 Chinese students to study in the US. What is a policy on Chinese students? Trump says, I'm getting along very well with President Xi. I think it's very insulting to say their students can't come here. What? You were the ones that said that they couldn't. I like that other countries' students come here, and you know what, if they didn't, our college system would go to hell really quickly. Maybe, even though he's been attacking universities gone to him and said, by the way, we won't be the leaders in education if 600,000 Chinese students suddenly weren't allowed to come here, and all the money they're bringing with them. Yeah, none of this makes sense. As someone says below, there are some countries with ideologies we can't live with. You know, is a kind of Trumpian position. But Chinese communism, that's okay. Well, apparently so. I mean, that's why they're going around taking stakes in private companies now, like Intel or public corporations. Just incredible. And yeah, just as I said, you've got... Stephen Miller saying these insane things. Gary Kasparov says, make no mistake, this is exactly what it seems to be. Preparation to create a one-party dictatorship. That is a super worry. So just a few bits and pieces to end the video. Let's bring in, because we don't talk about nice things, let's talk about the lovely news that Taylor Swift is getting engaged to Kelsey, the American football player. And that's a beautiful thing. Let's see what Charlie Kirk, the Christian conservative, says about this, and a person who started Turning Point USA pretty much and is at heart the American influence, the White House in terms of being a major influencer that works on their behalf. What does he have to say about this beautiful moment?
This is something that I hope will make Taylor Swift more conservative. Engage in reality more and get outside of the abstract clouds. Reject feminism. Submit to your husband, Taylor.
Oh.
You're not in charge. And most importantly, I can't wait to go to a Taylor Kelsey concert.
You despicable human being. Submit to your husband, Taylor. You're not in charge. Well, that's a nice way to congratulate them. Okay, so we've had the other news, in case you had your head firmly in the sand like an ostrich, is that Gavin Newsom has been beautifully trolling Donald Trump by doing these all-cap tweets on X, on Twitter, by mimicking precisely Trump's use of language, topics of conversation, phraseology, and also AI images and whatnot. And this has made the Republicans lose the plot. So you've had Fox News saying how childish this is and blah, 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 even though they essentially can't understand that if you're saying this is childish, he's mimicking Trump to show how childish Trump is. So if you're calling Gavin Newsom childish, you don't understand what he's doing. Here's a great example of Gunter Eagleman, a despicable right-wing nutjob on Twitter, not getting it. So Gavin Newsom puts on his feed, the Patriot shop is now open, and lots of American flags. He's got all these red MAGA style caps and sleeveless vests, wife beaters and mugs. And he's got a flag for sale called Make America Gavin Again. And then Gunter Eagleman says this is exactly what a narcissist, all caps, would post. Yes, it is. Like, as this source says, they're so close to getting it, and yet still so far. Like, that's exactly what a narcissist would say. But Gavin Newsom is not the narcissist. He's doing that to show that Trump is a narcissist, because that's exactly the flag that Trump puts up with Trump's name on. This is not Gavin Newsom truly wanting to express these kinds of views. This is irony. This is mimicry to poke fun at the outright narcissism of Trump. So if you go, this is exactly what a narcissist would post, you are saying kind of the right thing there. Yes, it is exactly what a narcissist would post. Donald Trump. Oh my goodness. Anyway, so this is all going over the internet. You got Gavin Newsom now doing all these AI, or people on his behalf doing all these AI photos to mimic Donald Trump, and he's now gaining loads of popularity. So people are saying, actually, he wasn't. Some people are thinking he's a California governor. He's too divisive. He's too California. He's too kind of Democrat. No, he's commanding the information spaces now, and he is now at the forefront. Now many people was like, I was listening to Chris Silitzer the other day, sort of saying, actually now he's my number one bet for Democrat candidate for president in 2028, because the first thing you've got to do is command the information spaces. Trump succeeded in doing that. Newsom is now playing the Trump game to do that, but with a sense of irony and all these kind of this tongue-in-cheek stuff here. But actually, people are responding really well to it. And also, the Democrats have been calling out for someone to fight. And he's the first person that's fighting. And so he's looking pretty good at the moment, actually looking very good in the polls. But, going back to the whole kind of dictatorship thing, we've got here the transformation has been gradual and unmistakable. By February, some golden urns on the mantle. April, gold adornments appear on the walls. By July, it's gold everywhere. Just this week, more scaffolding popped up. Even more new gold trim has appeared. So you've got the White House just becoming...
gold adornments appear on the walls.
More...
By July,
and
it's
more...
gold everywhere. Just this week, more scaffolding popped up. Even more new gold trim appeared. The room where presidents have long struggled with the big decisions has never looked so golden. And have you seen the Rose Garden lately? Jackie Kennedy's creation, the grass has now been replaced with bright white paving tiles. You might call it the Rose Patio. The latest addition this week, umbrellas, just like the ones on the patio at Trump's Mar-a-Lago club in Palm Beach.
So he has put umbrellas, the same umbrellas that he's got on his Mar-a-Lago golf course, in the White House. And of course, they are then going to build a $200 million ballroom appendage to the White House. If you're worried about homelessness in Washington to the point you're sending the National Guard in, I'll tell you what, give $200 million to Washington to solve that problem, rather than spending $200 million on a golden ballroom that makes you look like the sorts of dictator that we see in these parody movies. And talking about money, it's interesting that, Kamala Harris reportedly spent over $500 on cookware in a Parisian shop amid the US economic uncertainty, reports Fox News. So Fox News go to town on Kamala Harris for spending $500 in Paris, right? While the US struggles economically. And JD Vance has just gone on his 7th vacation in 6 months and 2 weeks at a $28,000 per week Scottish estate as inflation soars and prices skyrocket, yet not a peep from the right-wing media. By the way, then he went to the Cotswolds for, what was it, $11,000 a night or whatever. Well, I don't know. This was Fox News when Kamala Harris bought cookware for $500. Like, the problem in the United States is that Fox News is so powerful and it controls the narrative. And if you don't see it on Fox News, you don't know it, if you're a Fox News viewer, generally speaking. And they will report things in such a propagandistic way that they are merely the propaganda arm of Trump. But things aren't going well, and I wonder whether Fox News are aware of this. So I've seen Jake Bro talked about this the other week when he said because he lives near Vegas, I think, Jake Bro, and he went to the Las Vegas airport, and he's like, I know it's 6 a.m, but there's literally no one here, and I've never seen the Las Vegas airport empty. And then we're hearing that lots and lots, is that people are not traveling to the United States, people are not traveling to Las Vegas. I've never seen it this empty. The rapid decline of Las Vegas, that is a Daily Telegraph reporting that, and Lincoln Square saying apparently bankrupting his own casinos wasn't enough for him. So Trump famously managed to bankrupt his own casinos, or casino, I can't remember. Now it looks like he's going to bankrupt Las Vegas as well. It is not going well. And, you know, you look at the coffee prices, they're soaring. A pound of ground roast coffee now averages $8.41, which is up 33% from last year. And that is a direct result of putting tariffs of 50% on Brazil. So tariffs are going to hurt. And in fact, the tariff war has now gone into the postal war, where here's a list of all the countries now not mail delivering to the US, pausing mail deliveries because of Trump's tariff chaos. So there's some thing going on with parcel deliveries and all sorts that's a bit of a nightmare. And now much of the rest of the world is starting not to send post to the United States. This is making America great again, I presume. I presume it is. Now, all this is leading to me to, so I could talk to you about like dozens of other things. What's worthy of note is that every single special election, I think the average swing from all special elections since January the 20th has been 11 points to the Democrats. And this was really incredible, because this was a swing of something like, was it 80% or something? I don't know. Caitlin Dray, Democrat, has flipped this Iowa state Senate, breaking the Republican supermajority there. She got 54.5% of the vote against the Republicans' 45.5%. And it was a Trump 11.5 win or something. But I think, you know, her flip from that district or something is just an incredibly large swing. But the point is that these small elections taking place here and there, these special elections are a sign. And this was what happened back when there was that massive swing in the House of Representatives to the Democrats in Trump 1.0. So the midterms there, you saw, 42 seats going to the Democrats, and they having a sizable majority that then flipped back in Biden. But you can expect a huge swing in November 2026. And that's why Trump is trying to rig the elections, take out mail-in voting and voting machines, and redistrict and do all these things that a dictator would do, or a dictator wannabe would do, if he didn't want, or an autocrat wannabe would do if he didn't want democracy. And I'm going to leave you with the realization, so you know things are going sideways for Trump when all the polls are showing he's underwater across the board. He's losing that, not nearly quickly enough, in my opinion. But you've got Joe Rogan now starting to discuss the infamous 3-hour discussion he had with Trump, and starting to reflect on it a little bit and go, actually, he didn't really establish that point very well. So Rogan says, he didn't have an answer. What's he talking about? Well, Joe Rogan and Dave Smith discuss how Donald Trump couldn't actually explain how the election was supposedly stolen from him when he was on Rogan's podcast. And of course, A, because it wasn't, and B, because Rogan never pressed him. So if you softball an interview and you don't challenge Donald Trump on anything he says, Donald Trump can come across very nice. Thank you very much. You can have a lovely 3-hour conversation. It goes down very well. It's a winner for Rogan's viewership, because it looks like Trump is A-OK. Because he makes these claims and Rogan doesn't challenge him. And now, a year later, Rogan's going, he didn't actually establish how the election was stolen. I'm starting to see that now. Yeah, welcome to the party, mate. Anyway, that's my interpretation of everything that's going on in the world at the moment concerning Ukraine, but obviously a lot to do with the United States of America. And then, of course, if the US keeps going in the direction it's going in at the moment, it does challenge their ability to support Ukraine. If they are going to go for expansionist, imperialist, coercive attempts to take control of other territories and nations, then what does it say about what Ukraine is trying to do in stopping Russia from doing that? Like, it's important to understand what's going on in America, to understand what's going on in Ukraine, or what might go on in the future and where the US sits. Anyway, that's enough for me. Take care, guys. Speak to you soon.